Question for Shabir. In Surah 19, Ayah 33, Jesus himself says that he will die and rise again. Yet Surah 4, Ayah 157 to 158 says that Jesus didn't die. Was the Jesus of the Quran wrong when he predicted his own death and resurrection? Where could this idea have come from?
So, Surah 19, the Surah 19 passage has Jesus speak these words when he was young. So obviously it's referring to a future death. Commentators of the Quran who say that Jesus did not die yet say that when he returns, at that time he will die, and then his resurrection will be finally on the day of judgment with everybody else. And of course I have followed that argumentation in showing that Jesus did not quite die on the cross. They thought they killed him, but he did not quite die. And the Surah 4, 157 verse says, وَمَا قَتَلُوهُ يَقِينًا, they did not kill him for certain. So I take that to be a viable interpretation of the Quran to say that Jesus did not actually die, and that he will return, and at that time he would die. However, if a Muslim, in putting all of these passages of the Quran, decide that this all means that he did actually die, and even that he resurrected from the dead, the way the Christian Gospels say, then I wouldn't say that that person is a non-Muslim. I would say that that's an interpretation, that's an interesting one. And in fact, it's an interpretation that is now arrived at by many academic scholars. For example, Gabriel Said Reynolds, Todd Lawson, several scholars who have written about this. Todd Lawson has written a book, The Crucifixion and the Quran. So if some such person decides, hey, I want to be a Muslim, but I believe that Jesus died on the cross and resurrected from the dead and met with his disciples after that, just like the Christian Gospels depict, I wouldn't say this person cannot be a Muslim while holding to that belief, because I would say that the belief that I have arrived at, or the commentaries rather, and interpretations that I have arrived at, depends on piecing together these various pieces of the Quran in a particular way. Somebody has the right to do it in a different way.
Can I see it? Thank you. Yeah, I'll agree with Shabir that that is actually not a contradiction. What he says, which Muslims do say, is that the dying and rising is a reference to when Jesus does return. So yeah, that is not necessarily a contradiction. However, the point is that Jesus did die and rise. That is established by the gospel books, the New Testament books, written, once again, by eyewitnesses in a position to know. What Shabir said there is quite interesting, that you could believe that and still be a Muslim. Well, if you believe that, then as we said, Jesus' resurrection and death authenticates him, declares him to be the Son of God with power. It authenticates his entire message. And the message that Jesus brought, that's faithfully recorded through divine inspiration in the gospel books, is not compatible with Islam. So I'm not sure how, if you believe that, you would continue to be a Muslim.
I would say that the resurrection of Jesus from the dead, if in fact it happened, that does not mean that he's the Son of God. If you mean by that, ontologically, that he's the Son of God, except, of course, if you mean that metaphorically God loves this person, and in that case, as you know, if I meet a kid on the street and I put my hand on his head and says, my son, it doesn't. Peter says, refers to Mark as his son. It doesn't mean in the New Testament. It doesn't mean that Mark is literally his son. But if you mean literally that Jesus is the Son of God, and this is somehow declared by the resurrection, no, the resurrection from the dead, if that happened, would not prove that Jesus is the Son of God. It just proves that he's not the false Messiah. If they thought they're killing him and proving he's the false Messiah, and then God raises him from the dead and says, look, behold, you thought you can kill my man? No, you can't kill my man. This is my beloved. This is my son, even if he says that. Well then, that only means metaphorically that Jesus is the Son of God, not ontologically, and this is where Muslims differ with Christians. If Christians said that Jesus is metaphorically the Son of God, we wouldn't be having a debate over it, but if you say ontologically he's the Son of God, this is the problem.